The morning sun poured through the tall, arched windows of Sunny's Cafe, a cherished haven tucked into a lively corner of Michigan Avenue in Chicago. The cafe was a seamless blend of old-world charm and modern vitality, scarred wooden tables smoothed by years of use, soft jazz drifting from hidden speakers, and the warm, enveloping scent of freshly brewed coffee that wrapped every patron in comfort. It was the kind of place where the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, and the hiss of the espresso machine wove a tapestry of everyday life, a sanctuary for locals and tourists to pause and savor a fleeting moment of peace. For Jasmine Brooks, it was more than a cafe, it was her refuge, her quiet escape from a world that often felt overwhelming. Jasmine settled into her favorite spot, a small table by the window where the sunlight danced across the pages of her well-worn novel. At 38, she carried herself with a quiet grace that didn't demand attention. Her dark skin glowed under the morning light, her tight curls neatly gathered into a low bun, and her outfit, faded jeans, a soft green sweater, and a simple silver necklace, was practical, yet elegant in its understated way. She wasn't one to stand out, not because she couldn't, but because she chose not to. Her life was already layered with complexities she kept private. To the world, she was just Jasmine, the woman who smiled warmly, tipped generously, and always had a book in her hand. But her world was far bigger than anyone in the cafe could imagine. Her husband, Marcus Brooks, was the director of Homeland Security, a man whose name carried weight in rooms most people would never enter. His job was a relentless storm of classified briefings, high-stakes decisions, and constant public scrutiny. When he came home, he didn't need glamour or drama, he needed calm, stability, a safe harbor. Jasmine was that harbor. She kept their life private, their home a sanctuary, their marriage a quiet partnership that grounded his high-profile world. She didn't wear designer clothes, didn't flaunt their wealth, didn't even wear her wedding ring most days. It felt too ostentatious for her taste. Instead, she found joy in small rituals, like her Tuesday mornings at Sunny's Cafe, where she could blend into the crowd and just be. This Tuesday began like any other, or so she thought. She'd been coming to Sunny's for nearly a year, always at 8 a.m., always claiming the same window table with its perfect view of Chicago's bustling streets. Her order was a comforting constant, a cappuccino with an extra shot of espresso, a plate of blueberry waffles drizzled with maple syrup, and a side of crispy bacon. The staff knew her well. There was Carlos, the barista with a quick grin and an uncanny memory for orders. Lena, the veteran waitress, who always slipped an extra slice of bacon onto Jasmine's plate with a conspiratorial wink. And Ethan, the shy new waiter, barely 19, who was still learning the cafe's rhythm, but had a kind heart that shone through his nervous fumbles. They were her people, her little community, even if they didn't know the full scope of her life outside these walls. Jasmine was halfway through her cappuccino, her novel open to a dog-eared page, when the cafe door swung open with a jarring clang of the bell above. The air shifted, conversations faltered, and every head turned. Rebecca Harrington strode in, her presence like a cold front sweeping through a summer day. She was tall, her tailored cream blazer and matching skirt screaming wealth, her auburn hair swept into an elegant updo that didn't dare have a strand out of place. Gold earrings glinted in the light, her designer handbag swung confidently from her arm, and her heels clicked with sharp authority on the hardwood floor. Behind her trailed three others, two women, likely assistants, clutching tablets and exchanging hushed words, and a man in a pinstripe suit who moved with the quiet assurance of someone accustomed to fixing problems before they became public. Rebecca paused in the center of the cafe, her eyes sweeping the room like a predator sizing up prey. The chatter that had filled the space moments ago dulled to a whisper. The clink of forks and the hiss of the espresso machine seemed to hesitate. Jasmine noticed the shift but kept her eyes on her book. She'd seen people like this before, rich, entitled, demanding attention without saying a word. She wasn't here for their drama. She just wanted her waffles, her coffee, and her story. But Rebecca's gaze locked onto Jasmine's table, the prime spot by the window with its perfect view of Michigan Avenue's morning energy. Her lips pursed, her eyes narrowing as she took in Jasmine's simple sweater, her unassuming posture, the paperback novel in her hands. Without a word to her entourage, she marched toward Jasmine, her heels announcing her approach like a drum roll. She stopped at the table, one hand on her hip, the other gesturing dismissively. "You're in my seat," she said, her voice sharp and cold. Not a question but a command. As if Jasmine had trespassed on sacred ground. Jasmine looked up, her brow creasing in confusion. Confrontation wasn't her style, especially not here, in her safe space. "I'm sorry?" she said, her tone polite but puzzled. "This is my table. I've been here for a while. There are other spots open, though." She nodded toward a few empty tables nearby. Rebecca's expression didn't soften. If anything, it grew harder, her blue eyes glinting with something ugly. "Do you know who I am?" she asked, her voice rising just enough to pull every eye in the room. "I'm Rebecca Harrington. I own half the properties on this block, including this cafe's building. I own the lease your little breakfast spot depends on. When I want something, I get it. So, move." The cafe had gone deathly quiet, the kind of silence that feels like a held breath. Jasmine felt the weight of every stare, the sudden tension coiling around her. Her heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. Marcus had taught her that the loudest people were often the most fragile, that true strength didn't need to shout. She took a breath and met Rebecca's gaze. "I'm sorry, Miss Harrington, but I was here first. I'd like to finish my breakfast. There's a nice table right over there if you'd like it." Rebecca's face flushed, a pink stain creeping up her neck. Her assistants shifted nervously, and the man in the suit cleared his throat, but she ignored them. "You don't belong here," she spat, her voice thick with venom. "Look at you cheap clothes, sitting here like you're somebody. This place is for people with class, not for people like you." The words landed like a slap, heavy with implication. Jasmine's skin prickled, not just from the insult, but from the way Rebecca's eyes lingered on her dark skin, the way her tone carried a hint of racial disdain, unspoken, but unmistakable. "You think you can just waltz in here and take up space?" Rebecca continued, her voice growing sharper. "This isn't your neighborhood. Go back to wherever you came from." Jasmine's hands tightened around her book, her nails digging into the soft cover. She wasn't naive. She'd felt prejudice before. The subtle glances, the whispered assumptions, but this was different, raw, public, and unapologetic. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. "Never let anyone make you feel small, baby. You're as big as the world." Still, she kept her composure. "I'm just trying to enjoy my morning," she said softly, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "Please, let's not make a scene." "A scene?" Rebecca laughed, a sharp, cutting sound that sliced through the silence. "You're the one making a scene, sitting where you don't belong. People like you need to learn your place." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Get up, or I'll make you." The threat sent a chill through Jasmine, but she didn't move. She'd been raised to stand her ground, not with fists or shouts, but with quiet resolve. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Rebecca's hand shot out, grabbing a fistful of Jasmine's sweater. With a sharp yank, she pulled Jasmine halfway out of her seat, the table wobbling as her cappuccino spilled across her book, soaking the pages and dripping onto the floor. The cafe gasped as one. Lena froze mid-step, a tray of plates trembling in her hands. Carlos stopped wiping the counter, his rag dangling uselessly. Ethan, the young waiter, fumbled his phone, his eyes wide with shock, his fingers hovering over the screen as if instinctively reaching for it. Jasmine grabbed at Rebecca's wrist, trying to free herself, but Rebecca was faster. Her other hand came up, and before anyone could react, she slapped Jasmine across the face. The crack of skin on skin echoed through the cafe, louder than the jazz, louder than the morning traffic outside. Jasmine's head snapped to the side, pain exploding across her cheek. Her bun came loose, curls spilling messily around her shoulders. She tasted blood where her lip had split, and her vision blurred with tears she refused to let fall. For a moment, everything was still. Rebecca stood there, breathing hard, her hand still raised as if daring Jasmine to fight back. "That's what happens when you don't know your place," she said, her voice smug with triumph. She turned to the room, her gaze sweeping over the stunned customers. "Anyone else want to try me? I own this city. I can have this cafe shut down by noon. I know the mayor, the police commissioner, the health inspector. You name it. They answer to me." No one moved. Lena's tray trembled, plates clinking softly. Carlos looked like he wanted to speak but thought better of it. Ethan, still clutching his phone, had gone pale, his fingers now subtly moving across the screen, unnoticed by Rebecca. The other customers, businessmen in suits, a young couple sharing a muffin, an older woman with a crossword puzzle, all stared at their tables, their food, anywhere but at Rebecca. Fear had settled over the cafe like a heavy fog. Jasmine touched her burning cheek, her fingers coming away with a smear of blood from her lip. Her heart was pounding, but she forced herself to stand straight, to smooth her hair, to pick up her spilled book with as much dignity as she could muster. She wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not in front of this woman. "I'd like my check, please," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Lena snapped out of her daze, hurrying to the counter to print the bill. Rebecca smirked, sliding into Jasmine's seat as if she'd conquered a kingdom. Her entourage followed, settling around the table like loyal subjects. "That's better," Rebecca said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Now maybe people will think twice before wasting my time." Jasmine paid her bill, leaving a generous tip for Lena despite the chaos. She gathered her things, her soaked book, her purse, her composure, and walked toward the door, her head high even as her cheek throbbed and her sweater hung slightly askew. The cafe watched her go, their silence heavy with guilt. Ethan, still by the counter, slipped his phone into his pocket, his expression unreadable, but his hands steady now, as if he'd made a decision. Outside, Jasmine made it to her car, a modest sedan parked a block away. She slid into the driver's seat, locked the door, and let herself shake. The pain in her face was sharp, but the humiliation burned deeper, laced with the sting of Rebecca's thinly veiled racism. She wasn't just angry at Rebecca, she was angry at the silence, at the way everyone had looked away, at the way fear had let this woman act like a tyrant. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, and pulled out her phone. "Marcus," she said when he answered, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. She could hear the hum of his office in the background, the low murmur of voices, the rustle of papers. "Something happened at Sonny's. Can you come?" There was a pause, and she knew he was reading her tone, hearing the things she wasn't saying. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice tight with concern. "I'm okay, just please come." "I'm on my way," he said, and the line went dead. Jasmine leaned back in her seat, her eyes fixed on the cafe's windows. Through the glass, she could see Rebecca sitting in her spot, laughing with her friends, completely at ease. Why wouldn't she be? She'd just assaulted someone in front of a dozen witnesses and walked away untouched. Or so she thought. Jasmine sat in her car, her hands still trembling as she gripped the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the glowing windows of Sonny's cafe. The pain in her cheek pulsed with every heartbeat, a sharp reminder of Rebecca Harrington's slap, but it was the weight of the silence inside the cafe that lingered heavier, the way every eye had avoided hers, the way fear had frozen everyone in place, left a bitter taste in her mouth, sharper than the blood from her split lip. She touched her cheek again, wincing as her fingers brushed the swelling skin, already darkening into a bruise. Her curls, freed from their neat bun, hung messily around her shoulders, and her soaked novel lay on the passenger seat, its pages warped from the spilled cappuccino. She wanted to drive away, to leave this moment behind, but something held her there, a quiet resolve, a refusal to let Rebecca's cruelty be the end of the story. Inside the cafe, Rebecca sat in Jasmine's spot, her laughter cutting through the subdued murmur of the room. Her entourage flanked her, their voices a low hum of agreement as she recounted some anecdote, her hands gesturing with the confidence of someone who believed she was untouchable. The other patrons had returned to their meals, but the air was different now, tense, fragile, like a glass teetering on the edge of a table. Ethan, the young waiter, moved quietly behind the counter, his phone still in his pocket, his face a mask of concentration. He'd recorded the entire incident, his hands steady despite the chaos, and now he was wrestling with what to do next. Lena, the veteran waitress, busied herself wiping down tables, her eyes darting nervously toward Rebecca's group. Carlos, the barista, kept his head down, focusing on the espresso machine as if it held the answers to the morning's upheaval. Jasmine's phone buzzed in her hand, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Marcus. 5 minutes out. Stay put. She exhaled, her breath shaky, and leaned back in her seat. Marcus was coming, and with him, a shift she couldn't quite predict but knew would change everything. She thought of his calm, steady presence, the way he could walk into a room and command it without raising his voice. He was the director of Homeland Security, a man who dealt with crises most people couldn't imagine. Yet at home, he was just Marcus, her husband, who made terrible pancakes and laughed at her bad puns. She wondered what he'd make of this, of the woman who'd thought she could assault his wife and walk away unscathed. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Through the cafe's windows, Jasmine could see Rebecca leaning back in her chair, her posture relaxed, her smile smug. She was holding court, oblivious to the storm gathering outside. Jasmine's mind replayed the moment of the slap, the way Rebecca's words had dripped with disdain not just for her, but for who she assumed Jasmine was. The racial undertones in her voice, the way she'd sneered at Jasmine's cheap clothes and told her to go back to wherever you came from, had cut deeper than the physical blow. Jasmine had grown up in Chicago, born and raised on the South Side, her parents working hard to give her a life where she could hold her head high. She'd faced prejudice before, but never like this, never so blatant, so public, so violent. A dark SUV pulled into the parking lot, its unmarked exterior blending seamlessly with the city's morning traffic. Jasmine recognized it immediately. Marcus stepped out, dressed in a plain navy sweater and khakis, his usual office suit replaced with something deliberately unremarkable. To anyone else, he looked like a regular guy, maybe a dad picking up coffee, maybe a businessman on a casual day. But Jasmine saw the tension in his shoulders, the sharp focus in his eyes as they scanned the lot and found her car. He was at her door in seconds, pulling it open with a gentleness that contrasted the storm brewing in his expression. "Jasmine," he said, his voice soft but laced with steel. He crouched beside the open door, his eyes taking in her bruised cheek, her split lip, her disheveled curls. His jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek, but his hand was gentle as he reached out to touch her arm. "Who did this to you?" "She's inside," Jasmine said, her voice quieter than she intended. "Her name's Rebecca Harrington. She thought I didn't belong in her seat. Said I was nobody, that I didn't deserve to be there. Then her voice broke, and she swallowed hard, forcing the words out. She grabbed my sweater, pulled me up, and slapped me." Marcus's eyes darkened, but he kept his voice steady. "Tell me everything. Every detail." So she did. She told him about Rebecca's entrance, her demand for the table, the insults laced with racial venom. She told him how Rebecca had yanked her from her seat, how the slap had echoed through the cafe, how the room had gone silent with fear. She told him about Rebecca's threats to shut down the cafe, to ruin anyone who dared challenge her, to use her connections with the mayor and the police. As she spoke, Marcus's expression grew colder, more focused, the kind of look she'd seen when he was dealing with a national security threat, not a personal one. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on her arm. "Come on," he said finally, standing and offering her his hand. "We're going back inside." Jasmine hesitated, her stomach twisting at the thought of facing Rebecca again. But Marcus's presence was a steady anchor, and she trusted him implicitly. She took his hand, letting him help her out of the car. Her cheek still throbbed, her lips stung, but she straightened her sweater and smoothed her hair, determined to walk back in with her head high. They entered the cafe together, the bell above the door chiming softly. The room froze again, but this time, the tension was different. Expectant. Curious. Lena's eyes widened when she saw Jasmine return, her tray nearly slipping from her hands. Carlos paused mid-pour, coffee dripping onto the counter. Ethan, still behind the counter, looked up, his hand instinctively moving to his pocket where his phone was hidden. Rebecca didn't notice them at first, too caught up in her conversation, her laughter ringing out as she gestured animatedly to her entourage. Marcus walked straight to Jasmine's table, his steps calm but deliberate. He stopped beside Rebecca, who was still seated in Jasmine's spot, her designer handbag resting on the table like a trophy. "Excuse me," he said, his voice polite but firm, cutting through the hum of her conversation. "You're in my wife's seat." Rebecca looked up, her expression shifting from irritation to disdain as she took in Marcus's casual clothes, his unassuming appearance. She laughed, a short, dismissive sound, and her entourage followed suit. "And who are you supposed to be?" she asked, her tone dripping with mockery. "Her bodyguard? Her brother?" "Look, I've already dealt with her kind today. Why don't you both just run along? You're embarrassing yourselves." Marcus didn't flinch. He turned to Jasmine, his hand gentle on her elbow, his focus entirely on her. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice soft, as if Rebecca and her group didn't exist. "I'm fine," Jasmine said, though her voice trembled slightly. She could feel the eyes of the cafe on them, the weight of their attention pressing against her bruised cheek. Lena appeared at Marcus's side, her face pale but determined. "Sir, I saw everything," she said, her voice shaking but gaining strength. She grabbed Jasmine by her sweater, pulled her up, and hit her. Hard. "We all saw it, but Miss Harrington. She said she'd shut us down. Said she knew people. We were scared." Marcus nodded, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "Thank you, Lena. Can you tell me exactly what happened?" As Lena began to recount the incident, her voice steadier now, other voices joined in. An older man at a nearby table, his hands gnarled from years of work, spoke up. "I saw it too. She was yelling about owning the city, said nobody could touch her. I got it on my phone." He held up his device, his hands trembling slightly but his voice firm. A young woman with a toddler in a high chair added, "She threatened to have the health inspector shut this place down. Said she could ruin anyone who spoke up. I wanted to call the police, but..." She trailed off, glancing at her child, her fear evident. Ethan stepped forward, his voice quiet but resolute. "I recorded it too," he said, pulling his phone from his pocket. "The whole thing. I didn't know what to do at first, but I couldn't just let it go." He glanced at Jasmine, his eyes apologetic. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner." Jasmine managed a small smile, her heart lifting slightly at the courage starting to ripple through the room. "It's okay, Ethan. Thank you." Rebecca's confident facade began to crack, her eyes darting between Marcus, the witnesses, and her entourage. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice rising. "Do you know who I am? My family runs this city. I can have you all arrested for harassment. I can make one call, and..." "Can you?" Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge now, like a blade hidden in velvet. He turned to face her fully, and for the first time, Rebecca seemed to falter, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her face. "You can have me arrested? That's interesting." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his credentials, holding them up so she could see. Marcus Brooks, Director of Homeland Security. The color drained from Rebecca's face, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Her assistants froze, their tablets forgotten in their hands. The man in the suit pulled out his phone, his fingers flying across the screen as he typed frantically, likely searching for confirmation of Marcus's identity. The cafe erupted in whispers, gasps rippling through the room. Lena's hand flew to her mouth, and Carlos nearly dropped the coffee pot he was holding. The older man with the phone looked at his device as if it had suddenly become a priceless artifact. "That's... You can't be," Rebecca stammered, her voice losing its edge. Her lawyer, or whoever the man in the suit was, leaned over, showing her his phone screen. Her eyes widened as she read, then flicked back to Marcus, then to Jasmine. The realization hit her like a wave, her smug confidence crumbling into panic. Marcus didn't wait for her to recover. He pulled out his phone, his movements calm and precise. "This is Director Brooks," he said into the receiver. "I need a police unit and 2 agents from the Chicago field office at Sonny's Cafe on Michigan Avenue. We have an assault case that needs immediate attention." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'm aware it's unusual. The victim is my wife." Rebecca found her voice, though it was shaky now. "Wait, please, this is a misunderstanding. I didn't know who she was." I didn't mean. She stopped, her words tripping over themselves as she realized how hollow they sounded. Marcus's eyes were ice. So you only assault people when you think they can't fight back? When you think there won't be consequences? His voice was low, controlled, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. Rebecca's lawyer tried to interject, stepping forward with his hands raised. Director Brooks, I'm sure we can resolve this privately. Your client assaulted my wife in front of a dozen witnesses. Marcus cut in, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. She threatened an entire establishment to keep them quiet. That's not something you resolve privately. Within minutes, 2 police cars pulled up outside, their lights flashing silently in the morning Sunday. An unmarked sedan followed, and 2 agents in plain clothes stepped out, their movements brisk and professional. The cafe door opened, and the officers entered, followed by the agents, who Jasmine recognized as part of Marcus's security detail. The police chief himself arrived shortly after, his face grim as he took in the scene. Director Brooks, Chief Larson said, offering his hand. His eyes flicked to Jasmine, lingering on her bruised cheek, her split lip, and his expression hardened. He turned to Rebecca. Miss Harrington, you need to come with us. Rebecca's voice was desperate now, her composure shattered. Chief Larson, please. You know me. My family we've donated to your department. This is a mistake. The chief's face was unyielding. I don't care who you know, Miss Harrington. You assaulted someone. We have multiple witnesses and video evidence. You're under arrest. As the officers read Rebecca her rights and led her toward the door, her cream blazer looking less pristine, her gold earrings catching the light like a fading crown. Jasmine felt Marcus's arm around her shoulders. He was careful not to touch her bruised cheek, his presence a quiet, unshakable anchor. Rebecca's lawyer tried to follow, muttering about legal options, but Marcus just shook his head. You should have stopped your client before she laid hands on someone. Now you get to represent her in court. The cafe was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, charged, alive with the weight of what had just happened. As the police cars pulled away, Jasmine looked around at the faces of the patrons, some of whom met her eyes with apologetic nods, others still processing the scene. Ethan approached, his phone still in hand. I sent the video to my friend at a local news station, he admitted quietly. I hope that's okay. I couldn't let her get away with it. Jasmine managed a small smile, her cheek aching but her heart lighter. You did the right thing, Ethan. Thank you. Marcus squeezed her shoulder gently. Let's get you cleaned up, he said, his voice soft but firm. And then we'll figure out what comes next. As they stepped outside, the morning sun felt warmer, brighter, as if the world had shifted just a little. Jasmine knew this wasn't over, not for her, not for Rebecca, not for the people in the cafe who'd finally found their voices. Something bigger was coming, and she could feel it in the air. The morning sun felt warmer as Jasmine and Marcus stepped out of Sunny's cafe, the bustle of Michigan Avenue humming around them. The police cars had disappeared, their flashing lights swallowed by Chicago's relentless rhythm. Inside the cafe, life was stirring again, patrons resuming their conversations, forks clinking against plates, the soft jazz weaving through the air once more. Lena wiped down tables with a quiet determination. Carlos poured coffee with a small, relieved smile. And Ethan, the young waiter who'd recorded Rebecca Harrington's assault, stood near the counter, his phone tucked away, his face a mix of nerves and quiet pride. Jasmine's cheek throbbed, the bruise darkening under her dark skin, and her split lips stung with every breath. But a strange calm settled over her. Rebecca's cruelty lingered like a bruise of its own, but the courage of those who'd spoken up. Lena, the older man with his phone, felt like a balm, and Marcus's steady presence beside her was an anchor in the storm. Marcus guided her to their car, his arm around her shoulders, careful not to graze her bruised cheek. Let's get some ice on that, he said, his voice soft but firm, carrying the quiet authority that defined him. He opened the passenger door, and Jasmine slid inside, her hands clutching her ruined novel, its pages warped from the spilled cappuccino, a silent testament to the morning's chaos. As Marcus started the engine, Jasmine glanced back at the cafe, her eyes lingering on her empty table by the window, now just another spot in the bustling room. She wondered if it would ever feel like hers again, if the warmth of her Tuesday mornings could return after such a violation. Her heart ached, not just for the pain in her face, but for the loss of something intangible, a sense of safety, of belonging. By the next morning, the video Ethan had sent to his friend at a local news station had ignited a firestorm online. The grainy footage of Rebecca yanking Jasmine from her seat, slapping her, and spewing threats had spread across X like wildfire, shared and reshared thousands of times. Hashtags like #Justice for Jasmine and #Chicago Cafe Incident trended, with people across the country voicing their outrage not just at the assault, but at Rebecca's arrogance, her assumption that wealth and connections made her untouchable, the racial undertones in her words, the way she'd sneered at Jasmine's cheap clothes and told her to go back to where you came from, struck a deep chord, sparking conversations about privilege, prejudice, and the abuse of power. Commenters called out the entitlement, the casual cruelty, and the way Rebecca had weaponized her status to silence an entire room. Jasmine sat at their kitchen table, a bag of frozen peas pressed to her cheek, scrolling through the posts on her phone. The screen glowed with messages of support, stories from strangers who'd faced similar humiliations, and calls for justice. It was overwhelming. This sudden spotlight on a moment she'd never wanted to define her. Marcus was across from her, his laptop open, his face a mask of focus as he typed rapidly. He'd been on the phone with his team since they'd gotten home, coordinating with the Chicago field office to ensure the case against Rebecca was ironclad. The video evidence, combined with statements from Lena, Ethan, the older man, and the young mother with the toddler, had made the assault charge airtight. But Marcus was digging deeper. She didn't just wake up and decide to act like this, he'd said the night before, his voice low and resolute. People like her leave a trail, and we're going to find it. And find it they did. Within 48 hours, the story had grown far beyond the cafe incident. Local business owners, emboldened by the viral video, began coming forward with their own accounts of Rebecca's tyranny. A bakery owner 2 blocks from Sonny's shared how Rebecca had threatened to buy his building and evict him unless he paid her exorbitant consulting fees for her real estate firm. A family-owned bookstore revealed she'd pressured them to sell their property at a loss, hinting at her connections with city officials who could make things difficult. A barista from another cafe posted about Rebecca's habit of intimidating staff, demanding special treatment, and threatening to have their businesses shut down if they didn't comply. Each story painted a clearer picture of a woman who'd built an empire on fear, using her wealth and influence to bully anyone who dared stand in her way. Jasmine read the posts, her heart heavy but hopeful. She'd never wanted to be a public figure, never wanted her quiet life dragged into the open. But seeing others find the courage to speak up, to break free from Rebecca's shadow, gave her pain a purpose. She set her phone down and looked at Marcus, who was still typing, his brow furrowed in concentration. They're not scared anymore, she said quietly. All those people, she controlled them for years, and now they're speaking out. Marcus looked up, his eyes softening as they met hers. That's because of you, he said. You stood your ground. You didn't let her break you. That gave them the strength to do the same. Jasmine shook her head, wincing as the movement tugged at her bruise. It wasn't just me. Ethan recorded it. Lena spoke up. That man with the phone, the woman with the kids, they all helped. I was just there, Marcus. I was just trying to have my coffee. You were more than just there, he said, his voice firm but warm. You showed them what it looks like to hold your head high, to keep your dignity, even when someone's trying to take it from you. That's power, Jasmine. The kind that matters. She managed a small smile, though it stung her lip. You sound like my mom, she teased, and they both laughed, the sound cutting through the tension in the room. But her mind drifted back to the cafe, to the moment Rebecca's hand had struck her, to the silence that had followed. She thought of her childhood on Chicago's South Side, where her parents had worked tirelessly to give her a life where she could walk tall. They'd taught her to navigate a world that didn't always see her worth, to face prejudice with grace but never with surrender. Rebecca's attack had been different, raw, public, laced with a venom that felt personal. The way she'd sneered at Jasmine's skin, her clothes, her very existence, had cut deeper than the slap itself. The federal investigation Marcus's office launched uncovered a web of corruption that stunned even the most cynical observers. Rebecca's real estate empire, built on prime Chicago properties, was riddled with cracks, tax evasion, forged permits, and evidence of bribes to city officials. Her threats to shut down Sonny's weren't empty. She'd done it before, forcing smaller businesses to close or sell by leveraging her influence with the health department and zoning boards. The police chief, who'd once attended her lavish fundraisers, issued a public statement distancing himself, his department condemning her actions. The mayor's office, scrambling to avoid the scandal, announced an independent audit of all real estate dealings tied to Rebecca's firm. The woman who'd thought herself untouchable was finding out just how fragile her empire was. 3 weeks later, Jasmine stood outside Sonny's cafe, her hand hesitating on the door handle. The memory of that morning flashed through her mind, the yank on her sweater, the sting of the slap, the weight of the room's silence. But she took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and pushed the door open. The bell chimed softly, and Lena looked up from the counter, her face breaking into a warm grin. "Jasmine, your usual spot's waiting for you, girl." Jasmine slid into her table by the window, the sunlight streaming in just as it always had. Her ruined novel was gone, too damaged to save, but she'd brought a new one, its pages crisp and full of promise. Carlos brought her cappuccino. The foam swirled into a perfect heart, and Lena set down her waffles, the extra slice of bacon winking up at her like an old friend. Ethan approached, his shyness tempered by a new confidence. "It's good to see you back," he said, his smile genuine. "Things feel different now." "Better." Jasmine nodded, her eyes sweeping the cafe. The atmosphere was lighter, the laughter freer, the air unburdened by the fear Rebecca had cast over it. A new sign hung behind the counter, bold and clear: "All are welcome, respect is non-negotiable." It brought a smile to her lips, a small but powerful reminder of the change that had taken root here. The customers, some familiar, some new, seemed more at ease, their conversations flowing without the shadow of intimidation. She thought of Rebecca, now facing multiple charges, her real estate empire crumbling under the weight of federal scrutiny. The woman who'd thought she could bend the world to her will was learning that no one is above accountability. As she sipped her cappuccino, Jasmine reflected on the lesson woven through the chaos of that morning. It would be easy to reduce it to a simple cliché: don't judge a book by its cover, or be careful who you cross. Rebecca had looked at Jasmine's jeans, her sweater, her dark skin, and decided she was nothing. Someone to be dismissed, humiliated, pushed aside. She'd been wrong, spectacularly so, not because of who Jasmine was married to, but because of who Jasmine was: a woman who carried herself with quiet strength, who refused to be diminished. But the real lesson wasn't about Jasmine's connection to Marcus, or even about Rebecca's downfall. It was deeper, more universal, and it resonated in every corner of that cafe. Rebecca shouldn't have treated anyone that way, regardless of their status or connections. The older man with his phone, capturing the truth in shaky footage. Lena, finding her voice after years of serving quietly. Ethan, pressing record despite his fear. The young mother with her toddler, who'd wanted to call for help but hesitated. They all deserved respect. Not because of who they knew or what they could do, but because they were human, each with their own struggles, dreams, and worth. Real power, Jasmine realized, wasn't in designer clothes or gold earrings or threats to shut down a business. It wasn't in owning half a city or knowing the right people. Real power was quiet, steady, rooted in kindness and dignity. It was in Marcus holding the door for a stranger, in Lena slipping an extra slice of bacon onto a plate, in Ethan finding the courage to act when it mattered most. Jasmine thought of her parents, who'd raised her to walk tall in a world that sometimes tried to make her feel small. Her mother, who'd worked double shifts as a nurse to pay for Jasmine's books, always said, "You don't need to shout to be heard, baby. You just need to stand." Her father, a bus driver who'd faced his own share of slights, taught her that respect was a gift you gave, not a prize you earned. She thought of Marcus, who carried the weight of a nation's security but never forgot to thank the barista, to tip the delivery driver, to treat every person he met with basic human decency. That was the kind of power that lasted, the kind that changed lives. The memory of that day stayed with her not as a wound, but as a reminder that the quietest people in the room could hold the most strength, that cruelty always carried consequences, even if they took time to arrive. A reminder that communities were stronger when people chose courage over fear, when they chose to see each other's humanity. Rebecca's empire was unraveling, her influence fading as more people came forward, freed from her threats. The bakery owner was fighting to keep his shop. The bookstore was thriving again. The barista who'd posted her story was starting a petition for fair treatment in local businesses. And Sunny's Cafe, with its new sign and its lighter air, felt like a beacon of what was possible when people stood together. Jasmine finished her waffles, the sunlight warm on her face, her new novel open in her hands. The bruise on her cheek had faded, her lip had healed. But the lesson of that day was etched into her. She was still just Jasmine, still reading her book, still savoring her coffee, still finding joy in the small moments that made life hers. But she knew now that those small moments could ripple outward, touching lives, shifting perspectives, breaking chains. The cafe felt like hers again, not because she'd fought for it, but because she'd shown it was worth fighting for. As she stepped back into the world, Chicago's streets alive with stories, Jasmine carried a truth she'd always known but now felt in her bones. Treat everyone with respect, not because of who they might be, but because it's the right thing to do. That was the power that mattered, the power that built communities, that lifted the silenced, that reminded the world that no one was truly untouchable. It was a lesson for everyone, not just for Rebecca, not just for the cafe, but for anyone who thought wealth or status could justify cruelty. And as she walked away, her head high, her heart steady, Jasmine knew she'd carry that lesson with her, quiet but unshakable, for the rest of her days.